Like I said, praise the Lord to everyone. We're getting ready to start our Sunday school lesson for today, the 18th of May, 2025. And our subject this morning is worship is restored. Worship is restored. And it's taken from Ezra. That is the book of Ezra. And now Ezra was a priest, a scribe, and a very influential leader. Now, Ezra was a direct descendant of our first high priest, that is Aaron. And also Ezra is responsible for not only the book of Ezra, for Second Chronicles, First and Second Chronicles, and also Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah. Now, in our lesson today, we have two outlines. The first outline, our lesson is taken from the third chapter of Ezra, verses 1 through 6, and verses 10 through 13. And there are two outlines. The first outline is rebuilding the altar, and that's verses 1 through 6 of the third chapter. And our second outline is laying a foundation, and that is verses 10 through 13 of the book of Ezra. Now, the way the lesson is actually laid out is very important, and it really sets the tone for the theme, or the most important thing that we should take away from this lesson. And I will give the outlines again. It says rebuilding the altar, and that's the first outline. And the second outline is laying a foundation. As I said, that order is very important, and we're going to explore why it's important, and that's really the biggest takeaway from this lesson here, and we'll talk about it. Now, let's before we get into the third chapter, let's take a look at a couple other verses in Ezra. That is verses, starting at verse 1, actually. Now, we're talking about, first of all, we're talking about rebuilding the altar. Now, we know that Judah was taken captive into Babylon, okay? And now it was because of their disobedience and all of that. I mean, we're not going to go into that, but that was the reason that they were taken captive into Babylon. Now, this was not permanent. This was not a permanent. Now, if we think about, we talked about the divided kingdom a bit last week, and we were talking about under three kings, that is Saul, the first king, David, the second king, and Solomon was the third king of united Israel. And after Solomon, the kingdom split, and we had the northern kingdom, which was Israel, and then we had the southern kingdom, which was Judah. Now, Judah, the divided kingdom existed for hundreds of years. I'm not exactly sure, but it existed for a long time. Then the northern kingdom, that is Israel, went away. They were scattered. They went away. But the kingdom of Judah remained for a long time, and after many years, They had good kings, bad kings, and things were going good for a while. Then you had a bad king, and things went, as they said, south. So eventually, because of the prophets, they came and spoke to them and said, repent. And they didn't. The people didn't. And ultimately, the southern kingdom, that is Judah, was taken into Babylonian captivity for 70 years. It was planned. It was 70 years. It wasn't a lifetime, as we would say. Now, after 70 years of Babylonian captivity, and Cyrus, the king of Persia. Now, as I said, Babylon overthrew Judah, and they destroyed the temple at Jerusalem. That was Babylon. Now, Babylon was overthrown by Persia. Okay, they was overthrown by the kingdom of Persia. And at this time, in verse 1 of chapter 1 of Ezra, now the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. So Cyrus is the king of Persia who overthrew Babylon and so what happened, and Cyrus is a pagan king, and he was mentioned in prophecy, okay? And we're going to read here in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jerusalem might be fulfilled. And the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing. In verse 2, thus said Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord Jehovah, the God of heaven, hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judea. Now, so when they overthrew, Cyrus was the governor of Persia. He made a decree allowing any of the Jews to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. So, and this is a pagan king, as I said. Cyrus is a pagan king. So basically, the point there is God can use anybody. He can use anybody. Now, he told him he would bring him back. He told him that. He said, in 70 years, you're going to come back. So Cyrus made a decree. So now they return back to their homeland. Now, this lesson, we're talking about Ezra wave, or Ezra movement back to Jerusalem. Now, the first one was Zerubbabel. Okay, and you can read that in chapter 2 of Ezra. So the first wave of exiles returning back to Jerusalem was under Zerubbabel. Okay, but now this wave that Ezra is leading here is the second wave, not the first wave. And the mission here is, as the lesson says, worship is restored. And I said it's important to remember the order that the lesson lays it out. It says rebuilding the altar. The question is this, and this is what the lesson is going to answer. Why do we want to rebuild the altar? We want to, they're going to construct the temple, lay the foundation, but why are we going to do this first? And this is very important, and this is going to be our takeaway, is restore the right relationship with God first. First things first. We want to restore a right relationship with God. And that's what the first outline is talking about. It's talking about rebuilding the altar. And let's, well, first of all, remember last week's lesson where, I believe it was last week's lesson, where Solomon dedicated the temple? It said in chapter 2, verse 1 says, when Solomon had made an end of praying. So when he finished his prayer, that's why our lesson picked up last week. The fire came down. Let's look at it there. When Solomon had made an end to prayer, the fire came down from heaven, consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifice, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. And we said last week that represented the presence of God. So basically, before you want to do anything, you want to usher God's presence in. So before we're going to lay this foundation, we need to get a right relationship with God. So that's really the lesson in essence. You want to first establish a relationship with God. So that's why they built the altar, because the altar represented offering sacrifices to God, so for his approval, for his, as Solomon prayed, he prayed for guidance. One of his things that he prayed for was for guidance. And certainly, if you undertaking a major project, you certainly need God's guidance. And that's why building the altar is so important, is to establish a right relationship with God. And let's look at, just read verse 1. Verse 1.
And when the 7th month was come, and the children of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered themselves together as one man to Jerusalem.
Okay, so that one, they was united. And we know that we can accomplish great things if we are one or united. That's a good takeaway right there. They were united. And chapter 2, around about the 64th and 65th verse of chapter 2, it gives a number. It numbers the people that were there. And it was roughly around 50,000 folk, okay? Because you read in 64, the whole congregation together was 40 and 2,303 scores, and it talks about the servant. So basically, if you add those up, around 50,000 folk. So that was the thing. So the people were together. The people were one. The people were united, okay, in their effort, that is to rebuild the altar. And to do two, and this is talking about the people that were the leaders.
Then stood up Jeshua, the son of Jehozadak, and his brethren, the priests, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his brethren, and built the altar of the God of Israel, to offer burnt offerings thereon, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God.
Now, and this is, as the lesson said, it is to rebuild an altar. Basically, they are going back to, when you go back to something like if you have a law, and they call it the original document. So they went back to the original document. They wanted to do everything by the letter as it was written in the law of Moses. We don't want to shortchange it. So basically, now if you think about it, before the people were taken in exile in Jerusalem, in Babylon, right? Before they were taken in exile, they had strayed away. Otherwise they would have been taken in exile. You can. That's a given. That's why they were taken in exile. I think it was. I remember this Josiah, and you have to look him up. He wasn't the last king, but he was the last good king. And after that, Josiah, it just went downhill, constantly downhill, not up and down. But before that, it was up and down. You had a good king, then a bad king. Good king, bad king. But then after Josiah, things just went downhill. So things had been bad. They had probably they wasn't, as they say, they weren't near about following the law of Moses at all before they were taken in exile. Now they're in exile for 70 years. That add another 70 years. So how long had they been basically offering true worship to God and offering sacrifice as it was written in the law? So they said, okay, we're going to go back and get this right based on what it was written. We're going to offer burnt offering, and we talked about last week how God approved the dedication, because soon as Solomon had finished praying, the fire came down, burned up the burnt offering, the sacrifice, and everything. So God approved. And if you might want to say, God probably hadn't approved their sacrifice in years. I mean, hundreds of years. So we want to go back and get it right, okay? Because that ushers in God's presence. We want God's presence. We want to establish a right relationship with God. That's why we want to build the altar first. And that's what, when you're trying to get your life together, establish a good relationship with God first. Okay, that's more important than building the structure. That's important, but more important. What's more important? Okay, and 3 and 4, there was the sacrifices. Actually, 3, 4, and 5.
And they set the altar upon his basis, for fear was upon them because of the people of those countries. And they offered burnt offerings, and thereon unto the Lord, and even burnt offerings morning and evening.
Okay, hold up right there. Okay, I just want to talk about this verse for a minute here. Okay, now when they returned back to rebuild, things wasn't just a piece of cake. They said, we can go in, there's no problem, no enemies. There were enemies there. Okay, so the work wasn't easy, wasn't without struggle. So even, this is the key point here, even though it says they set the altar upon this base for fear was upon them. In other words, they was afraid. I mean, it's almost like, what do they say about like your courage or something like that? I mean, even though that you have some apprehension, there's danger, but you persevere in spite of. So in spite of the fact that there were people in the area that didn't approve of that, didn't want them, there was danger around them, they still persevered and offered. It says offered a burnt offering unto the Lord morning and evening. Morning and evening. So that the idea that they were dedicated, and that's another thing. They were dedicated. Well, we don't want to do this because we're afraid. So you that's the point there, is that even though there were enemies there and they were fearful, but they still followed the law of Moses in offering burnt offering morning and evening. Okay, that's the essence, the key point there. Yeah, they were fearful, but they still they did it because they know that it's important. This is important. We're not going to give up because there's enemies there. Okay, and verse, I guess we can go in verse 4 and 5 now. I just wanted to cover that point about the fear there.
They kept also the Feast of Tabernacles, as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number, according to the custom, as the duty of every day required. And afterward offered the continual burnt offering, both of the new moons and of all the set feasts of the Lord that were consecrated, and everyone that willingly offered a free will offering unto the Lord.
Okay, so basically, now the Feast of the Tabernacle, let's talk about that for a minute. They kept the Feast of the Tabernacle. Now, these individuals was not the one that went through the wilderness experience. But that's what the Feast of the Tabernacles represent. I think it's also called the Feast of Booths, I believe it is. They lived in tents during that time to commemorate the fact that during the 40 years that the Lord took care of basically their ancestors, and it said what happened? Their clothes and all that didn't wear out. So that's what the feast, it was a 7-day feast. It commemorated the wilderness experience. That's what they celebrate. And it says, as it was written. And it keeps saying, as it's written. I mean, it's not like, well, we're just going to throw something together. And that's why they keep telling you, as written. In verse 2, it says, as written. In verse 4, it says, as written. So they want to make sure we're going to do it as according to the law of Moses. Like I said, they probably hadn't been doing it this way for years. For years. Like I said, otherwise, if they had been doing it this way for years, they wouldn't have been in Babylon. They wouldn't have been in Babylon. That's just simple to understand. So they had not been keeping it according to the law of Moses for many years. For many years. So they kept the Feast of Tabernacles. And it signifies their past protection in the wilderness, how God protected those. And we know what happened. We know what happened, but many died, but God preserved those, and you all know that as far as it was their ancestors, and it was said to keep this, to remember, and what 5 it says, and all the fears of the Lord they were consecrated. Okay, and everyone willing to offer the free will offering unto the Lord, and this is again, it goes back to the camaraderie, the unity. Okay, so they were united, and they were determined to bring back true worship. That's basically what it is talking about. Bringing back true worship. And let's do this right, and let's do first things first. Get your heart right with God. Establish the right relationship with God first. And then, now we talking about, let's get this right. Now, and verse 6 tells us right here. Verse 6.
From the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord. But the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid.
There it is right there. It tells you, let's get this altar established. We're not going to focus on laying the foundation of the temple. It's 6b said, the foundation of the temple was not yet laid. Not yet laid. Now, we're talking, now this here And the second outline is laying the foundation. Now, this, let me be clear, and this outline is going to explain. Let me be clear. This is not Solomon's temple. It's not Solomon's temple. We're going to see it. We're going to see, well, it can't be Solomon's temple. What happened to Solomon's temple? It was destroyed. So this is actually the second temple. This is the second temple. Okay? And we're gonna read and see, and you say, oh yeah, I see now. It's not Solomon's temple. Okay, it says, lay the foundation, and verse 10, it just talks about the music and worship, and go ahead with that.
And when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, they set the priests in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals to praise the Lord after the ordinance of David, king of Israel.
Now, and we talked about David last week. He was the one that introduced music and worship. Made a lot of the instruments. So basically, that's what they're talking about there. And we also said the Levites, they were in charge of the music, and they were in charge of taking care of the temple. And all of the priests came from the tribe of Levi. Not all Levites were priests, but all priests were Levites. They came from that tribe of Levi, but not all. But they were worked in the temple, the music and setting the temple up and carrying it, taking it down when it was in the wilderness, taking it down, setting it up, and we know the story about somebody. They was carrying an ark one time, and it was on a. Well, I think they were doing a couple of things wrong. They was carrying it incorrectly. And then it was falling, and this person touched it. So the whole point is that that was the job of the Levites to take care of the temple, all of the arrangements and all that, and they were the priests. Now, okay, that's basically the music and worship. And verse 11 just really goes along with that. It just talks about praise music.
They sung together by chorus in praising and giving thanks unto the Lord, because he is good, for his mercy endureth forever toward Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because of the foundations of the house of the Lord was laid.
Okay, now it's they were praising God because of the fact, and this is what that began to symbolize, is worship restored. We want to restore the worship first, okay? And they sang praises. His mercy endures forever. All the people shouted with a great shout, and they all praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. And that's our key verse. When they saw that, they began to rejoice. They began to rejoice. And again, this is the second temple. And now we're going to get to the 12th verse, which just the 12th verse, and you're going to see why I said this is not Solomon's temple. Read the 12th verse.
But many of the priests and Levites and chief of the fathers, who were ancient men that had seen the first house.
Okay, stop right there. What house is it talking about? The first house?
Temple.
Solomon's temple. Now, I haven't laid eyes on Solomon's temple, but it must have been a beautiful place. Now, it says many of the priests and Levites and chief fathers who were ancient men, basically older men. Now, you know they were down there for 70 years, right? So they had to be over 70 to see the first house. I mean, that's they were elder, and there had to been quite a few. I was thinking this morning. I said, you must have had quite a few 70 plus in the crowd because of this, because of this fact. There wasn't just one or two, I believe. There wasn't just one or two because of what? Read the rest of it.
When the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, wept with a loud voice, and many shouted aloud for joy.
Okay, now, if it was a few in the crowd, in other words, yeah, we got a few like 75, 80-year-olds or whatever, it ain't gonna be that much noise compared to the number that is shouting for joy. The one that were weeping, it says, the one that saw the first house, okay, what did they say? Wept. They wept. The one that saw the first house. It was like about 10 or 15 of them. And many shouted for joy. Those that saw the second house was shouting for joy. They would overshadow the few. So there were quite a few people there that had seen. And that's what triggered my mind. So wait a minute. There was a good number of people that had seen the first house. To make that much noise that is indistinguishable. We can't, the people that's weeping and the people that's for weeping because they saw the first house and the people that's shouting for joy because they saw this house, we can't even distinguish. So that was the point that I was thinking about. I said, yeah, there's a lot of folks there that had seen the first house. And that's why I said earlier, this is not Solomon's temple. Because the one that had seen the first house, they said, oh, this is nice. This is nice, but it ain't Solomon's temple. It could have been, it's not Solomon's temple. That's why I say this is the second temple at Jerusalem. Because Solomon's temple was destroyed. Was the Babylonians just, destroyed the temple. And so they had to rebuild the temple there at, I think they said it was built on the same site, but it's the second temple. I know some churches have this a name Solomon's Temple. I think it's one in Detroit, I believe. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Solomon's Temple. But obviously it's not the Solomon's Temple, but that's why I said this is not here. This is not Solomon's Temple. But because of the fact that it doesn't have the splendor of the temple that Solomon's built. And because the thing about Solomon's temple, I would imagine, is that, and you remember David had this idea to build the Lord a house, and the Lord didn't want David to do it because David was a man of war, and he said, I'm going to allow your son, Solomon, to build the temple because Solomon was a man of peace. And during Solomon's reign, Israel was at peace. It wasn't at war like David. But David had the blueprints. David gathered the material. But Solomon oversaw the construction. That's where we were last week when the temple was built and it was dedicated. So Solomon's temple was by all accounts, a magnificent building. magnificent structure. But the key, but the key thing with it is the sacrifice, God's presence. That's the key thing, God's presence, and doing it as they said several times, as written in the law of Moses. And that's the thing, and that's another takeaway that we can do it. And people say, as unto the Lord, do it as unto the Lord. But you want to do it as it is written. Do it as near, go back to, as they said, the original document. The original document. And you don't want to get too far. Go ahead.
I was just thinking, this might be a little bit off, but it still got something to do with God and how He deals with us.
Mm.
When they was talking about the ones that ancient, that been around for a long
Right.
time, they saw something of God that the younger ones
Mm.
didn't see.
Mm.
And it makes me think about, like, it's a blessing to have those who have been around a long
Right.
time who can pass on some things
Right,
that God
right.
had done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, coming up,
Right.
we had good
Right.
leaders that passed on things that God had done over the years.
Right.
And I pray to God we don't lose that. I pray that those of us are still here that we can
Right.
pass on, you know, the goodness of God, the things that maybe the young ones haven't seen about Him,
Mm-hmm.
but we can pass that on to them so they can get excited
Right.
about the God we serve.
Yeah.
You know, like I said,
Yeah.
it might be a little off from the.
Yeah. Well, it finally because as I said, and we said that Josiah was the last good king. Now Josiah was not the last king of Judah. Was not the last king. Now there were good kings before I think Hezekiah was one, but there were good kings, and some of them tried to bring in reform. If you look through it, they tried to bring in reform. But the thing is that, okay, if you're not following the pattern, it's just like this. Without guidance, if you take a car and you take your hand off the wheel, if the road is level and straight, it's gonna go straight for a minute without manipulating the steering wheel. But what's gonna happen is gonna veer off course. And the more you veer off course, it's just like if you shooting at a target that's 100 yards away and you 1 degree off. At 500 yards, are you going to be more off course? Yes, because the further out you get, the more off course you're going to be. So probably the worship, after a while, before they were taken into Babylonian captivity, the worship probably didn't even resemble. It's just like you might go to, this is nothing like, this is so far off. I mean, and generally speaking, you're not going to get off course overnight. It's going to be a gradual thing. So if there's no, if you don't refocus, you're going to be so far off course till it's not even funny. So even when Jesus came and he told at this one point, he said, the scripture, you bring a sacrifice. Now, they got so far off, they were selling. You could go, and they had probably, they called it a stock pen. They had a stock pen. Well, you need to offer a lamb. Well, just go, I didn't bring a lamb. Go to the stock pen and pick out your lamb. They were selling sacrifices. Now, tantamount, well, first of all, they made it easier for the people. Well, I don't want the people to see me bringing this sacrifice. They know I sin. So, okay, we're going to accommodate you. We're going to accommodate you. Just come and buy the sacrifice. That's what they were doing. That's what they were doing. They were cheating the people. They had money. Jesus said, you made my house a house of thieves. They were so far off course that it wasn't funny. But it didn't get off course overnight, clearly. It was a gradual thing. And this is why I keep saying, as it was written in the law. We go back to the law and see. And that's why and I'll just throw this in. I got maybe 5 minutes, to cover another verse. But here's the thing. And that's why we have supposedly, well, they set it up this way. They set up our government, okay? And they have, in our federal government, they have 3 branches. Now, they call them 3 equal branches. We have the courts. Now, the court's job, basically, is to, what? Invalidate laws. They coming up with, well, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. Well, the court said, wait a minute. You can't do that. Now, if the court said, oh, yeah, go and do that, we'd be so far off course that it's nothing. Every day I read, well, the executive branch want to do this. And then they sue this, no, and the court said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. If there was, and this is what they call it. They call it what? Checks and balances. If there's no checks and balances, what would we do? If somebody got to stand up and say, wait a minute, you can't do that. Somebody have to be there, and that's what they said. Our government has set up with checks and balances. And if nobody is there checking it, making sure, it says, according to the law of Moses, that you can't do that. Mm-hmm. But if they say, if the priest said, well, we're going to do this, and somebody don't stand up and say, wait, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Oh, yeah, you can do that. We'll be so far off course. And basically, in essence, the law of Moses, well, the law of Moses doesn't apply today, but the point is that, we have the word of God. It's like, well, that don't matter. And some people might say today, well, it says so-and-so, so-and-so. No, I don't mean that. But somebody got to say, yes, it does. It does mean that. It does mean that. Okay, and verse 13, which is our last verse. We got about a couple minutes here.
So that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people, for the people shouted with a loud shout, and the noise was heard afar off.
Okay, so that's why I go back to the point is that the shout of joy versus those that were weeping. So, and they, like I said, those were the ones that saw the first temple, and it had to be a lot of them. And basically the thing is, what they say wasn't the noise was heard afar off. It was celebrating the building of the laying of the foundation and representing restoring true worship to God. That's what the sacrifices represented, and it represented true worship. And our takeaway today is that's what you want to do first. Establish a right relationship with God first. What good is a magnificent building? I mean, well, they said, well, you got a beautiful Ephesus here, but God ain't nowhere there to be found. That ain't no good. Establish a relationship with God first. That's our first priority. And that's our lesson today is, good.
There's one thing that I want to think about, the ancient men.
Mm-hmm.
2 points, I think that one of the points was that they like, this is, what you're doing is okay, but like you say, Solomon's temple was something else.
Right.
It was magnificent. And then, since they didn't die in the wilderness,
Mhm.
those were the people that were trying to do right. And
Right.
they probably reflected back, if we would have been obedient to
Right.
God's word, this never would have happened.
Yeah, that's why they're in the situation they're in right now.
That's right, because of disobedience.
Disobedience.
We wouldn't have been here.
Right, right.
And that's
Let's
why
get
they
this,
gave
let's get this right. Let's get this right. So, let's get this right.